Hey everybody, welcome to Talking About Success. I'm your host, Jack Canfield, chairman of the Canfield Training Group. You probably know my books, The Success Principles and the Chicken Soup for the Soul series, sometimes referred to as the #1 success coach in America. And I am really happy today to welcome an amazing guest. Her name is Yemi Penn, and she's written her first book titled, Did You Get the Memo? And she's directed her first pilot documentary titled, Did I Choose My Trauma? Which I have seen. It's really amazing. And she's dedicated to guiding others in unlocking their untapped potential. And her work helps to raise the vibration brought about by trauma and is an inspirational thought leader who is daring humanity to transmute its pain into power. Wow, I love that. So thank you, Yemi, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. An absolute pleasure.
Now, you flew here, all the way from Australia, I think?
I did indeed. Yep, from the other side of the world.
And here we are in Santa Barbara, California.
We are.
I love your commitment.
I am dedicated, that's for sure.
Yeah. So let's start by just telling us a little bit more about who you are, your background, what you do.
The best way, I guess, I describe myself, and these are just words. So I'm an engineer by profession. I was meant to study law. My dad wanted me to study law, but there was something about creating things that excited me. And I remember running to the teacher saying, what is the job that's close to creating things? And it was engineering. And then I tell myself that I'm an entrepreneur by passion, meaning that rather than moan and whinge about the gaps in society, I first say, well, am I the one to do it? Because I believe our dreams choose us. And last but not least, I'm a transformation mindset coach, which is about daring people to lean into a different narrative so that they can be the best versions of themselves. And that's the best way I describe myself and what I do.
So before we get into the context of your documentary, which I really want to talk about, which I just viewed the other night and I really loved, tell me how you made the transition from engineer to author. That's a big shift. That's a big change.
My mum always used to say, Yemi, you can't be a jack of all trades and master of none. And I think that was a switch in my mind for, okay, let's see, let's try that. Look, going from engineering to being an author, there were many parts of life that I felt I was failing at. And that really was the beginning of my book, which is, did you get the memo? There seemed to be this memo that it felt like everybody else had got, but I hadn't. I felt like I was failing my kids, failing my culture, community. And I remember thinking, before I leave this earth, I want to be able to write a memoir. And obviously the imposter syndrome came up, which is, well, who are you to write? No one's going to read. And I just managed to convince myself, okay, just pretend you're writing a letter to your kids so that they can read it later. And then it took the best part of 2 years, of which 18 months was procrastinating, to write the book. And it was my first time of actually using the other side of my brain, from the engineering, which was analytical, to this more creative, how can I dialogue with people? And that was the first transition.
That's beautiful. Now you have children.
I do.
How old?
So I've got a 13-year-old and a 13-year-old daughter and a 7-year-old boy, and it keeps me busy.
Has your 13-year-old daughter read the book?
She has. She came to the book launch and she was actually really intrigued. She said, I didn't know that about you, Mum. And that for me was a tick, because I think we get so busy in life that we don't pass on some of the life lessons. And it was a really great introduction for her.
That's beautiful. I have a friend who is a financial planner. Yeah. And he said, if you ask wealthy people, if you could give your children all your money,
yeah,
or all your wisdom, but you couldn't give them both, which would you choose? And these billionaires say, my wisdom.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. I love that. I'm going to use that one. It would definitely be wisdom, because it's what they do with it then. And if anything, gives them the foundation rather than just the gift.
Yeah. So was your book like a warm-up for the documentary? How did the documentary come about?
The documentary, there was a lot of reluctance, hesitancy. And I love that question, because the book was almost me just like warming up my voice box. It was me, what I call clearing my throat chakras. It was just, I'm going to write this. And if you want to read it, read it. So it was almost like see me, but don't see me. That was really the intention behind the book. The documentary, definitely 2020 was a catalyst for it. It was, how can I get a message out in a creative way that has people lean in? And the first thing was a documentary, and then the title. And I wanted to hone in on the topic I believe is part of my mission, but I'd just been too scared to do it. And since releasing the documentary literally 3 weeks ago, the response has been phenomenal. So for me, this is where I'm meant to be, and hopefully do more documentaries.
Really good. I'm just curious, how long did it take you to make the documentary?
It took 3.5 months.
3.5 months.
Yeah, correct. So May 13th was the day that I said, okay, I'm going to do it. And this was me just talking to myself. And then we had everything finished and wrapped up August, September. And then, we released it in October.
And before we came on air, you told me you actually went online and Googled how to create a documentary. Is that right?
Hand on heart. I didn't even know whether it was an executive producer, didn't know what a DP was, which I think is director of photography. Literally, that's what I did. And then Facebook came up with a few freelancers because I knew I needed to do it on a budget. I just wanted to get it out. So I didn't want to wait for funding. And it was that simple. So Google's doing some good work.
I love it because it really proves the principle. If you make a commitment and you dedicate yourself to it and you start taking the actions that it would take to get there, then the universe lines up to support you.
Absolutely. And like I said earlier, definitely read that in a number of your books. And the Success Principles for me, I mean, that is just a book of goodness. And that was one thing. It was just stay focused on what I want to achieve, the why, and everything fell into place.
Beautiful, 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 beautiful. So let's talk about the documentary. The title is Did I Choose My Trauma? Mm-hmm. And I'm someone who teaches responsibility, and I've spent the last 40 years helping people process traumatic events from their past. I was deeply moved by how vulnerable you were in the movie, talking about your own trauma. So let's talk about that.
It was me getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And it's a big message I give to people when I'm doing workshops or one-on-one clients. I didn't actually realize that I was being courageous or brave till after people watched it. And it started to make me realize that actually just speaking your truth, especially when it's disturbing, is seen as courageous. What happens if we can create more spaces that allow people to do that? So to say that I was a bit nervous was probably a bit of an understatement. More nervous because of family and friends. You know, I still come from a generation and a culture that has you protect yourself by not speaking about it. But for me, the trigger is what I leave for future generations, my kids in particular, but also wider. So it was a case of being courageous, and I'm so grateful that I did.
Was there an important moment in that process for you that stands out above everything else?
It would probably be before I did it. I mean, so I've got a 13-year-old, and to say that teenagers are dealing with probably more challenges than my generation dealt with is an understatement. And I remember speaking to my daughter and finding out she was having some troubled times in school. And I found that my response to what would be her crisis was disassociative, meaning that I completely just separated from the issue because it got too hard. That for me was a turning point. That was a point that said, okay, I need to take the conversation wider because hopefully I will get more people that will lean in. Because now not only is my unresolved trauma affecting me, it's affecting how I parent my daughter because I just struggled to stay in my body when she was going through an issue. So for me, that's a pivotal point.
Now, in your documentary, you talk about that, this idea of disassociation, that when you're having this traumatic experience, one way to survive it, because you feel powerless in that moment, is just to leave, to check out. And then that continues as an adult, checking out, not being able to set boundaries, not knowing when you're in bed. Really talk about that a little bit, if you could.
So if I relate that to my personal life, I wrote my book, I didn't get the memo. And that was because I felt like, I was in a relationship, I had my daughter, and then we separated, I got married and then got divorced. And even though I don't like labels, I felt like I was broken and I was in a broken home. And now when I look at the work I'm doing in the trauma space, I wonder whether that is part of it. Maybe every time it got difficult, I disassociated. But if I was at least aware of it, I would reach out to resources and appreciate not everyone can afford, the therapist, but there are resources out there once we give it a name. I mean, someone said this once, which is you can't say goodbye to something you never said hello to. So for me, just noting that as a defense mechanism has been really great for me to say, okay, let's stay with this discomfort and it will be better on the other side.
Yeah. Yeah, a friend of mine says we have to stand in the pain of stand in the fire of our discomfort. That's where the growth occurs.
And it sounds scary, doesn't it? But I like the end bit. That's where the growth occurs, and I'm there for that.
Yeah, I also heard a phrase recently from someone. They said, some of your greatest gifts come wrapped in sandpaper.
Oh, I felt the burn when you said that. Okay.
Yeah.
Another one to note. Definitely.
Well, I mean, I think that's true for your life. You know, as painful as this has been for you to have to experience it and then also come to terms with it, become aware of it, work on healing it, it's allowed you to become a healer.
Absolutely. 100%. And, you know, that's part of the TEDx talk I've got coming up, which is how can we unearth our gifts? But first, we would need to get uncomfortable and start asking those empowering questions. So I love that. It's definitely been every part of my journey.
Mm-hmm. So I want to ask you two questions about reaction. One is, before the film came out, and maybe even before the book, I don't know. But what's been the reaction? Here you are, you're an engineer. That's a classical kind of scientific training. Mm-hmm. And then you're talking about trauma, talking about maybe the spiritual aspects of all that.
Yeah.
How do people respond to you when you bring this up?
Well, I think there's a bit of a blessing here. There's a blessing, and I, once again, don't know whether maybe in a previous life or something I signed up for this, but having the engineering part of me allows different people, men and women, to lean into what I'm saying. So I tend to be able to speak to those who use either the left or the right side of the brain. I think some people are confused, but they are intrigued. And as a result, I've been blessed enough to get their attention enough to have the dialogue. I would say that the corporate world, that's where a lot of my clients sit, are struggling. They are struggling with, well, what has trauma got to do with, you know, the workplace? And I'm now trying to change the language to a place that they can understand it, similar to what Brene Brown did with vulnerability. But for me, whenever I'm in a meeting and there's chaos, it's actually trauma that I now see bubbling up, including myself. I was one of those people who would sit in a meeting and not say anything, because I was still holding fear of being seen or heard. But I now acknowledge that in myself. And I think it's time for, you know, corporations in the US, Australia, the UK, around the world to say, okay, let's try and get to the heart of the matter, because it might actually have a positive impact on our P&L and our people.
Sure. Whenever people grow, they just become more effective at whatever they do.
Absolutely.
So the other question about reaction is, now your documentary's been out for a short period of time, but what's been the reaction to that from people who've seen it?
It's been phenomenal. It couldn't be any better. I mean, we have had a few people who have said, no, of course I didn't choose my trauma. And then they watch the documentary and there's a shift. And the shift is about the power that they hold. So we've had people literally from all around the world. We're about to release it to, you know, Hong Kong, France, different, you know, languages. But what's happened is a shift. And I think it's the compassion that sits in there. I know there's so many movements and everyone has their cause. My cause here is to have this conversation at an elevated level, which is how can we respond to our trauma with compassion and courage? And I believe there's actually a lot of people crying for that, because the response has been to that effect.
Mm-hmm. I also, as someone, I didn't experience that kind of trauma. I had a violent father, so there was some emotional trauma,
Absolutely.
if you will. But I also think, just watching it as someone who didn't experience what you experienced, that it gave me a better understanding about how to be with people who've experienced trauma.
Yeah.
Is that part of your goal as well?
Absolutely. I mean, and I'm glad you said that, because I would have forgotten otherwise. So part of my TEDx talk actually highlights that no one's trauma is bigger than the other, because the body keeps score. And I give two contrasting examples. So absolutely, and that's the point, is that especially if you have experienced trauma, which according to the definition, most of us will, is what can you give back to humanity as a result? First, you've got to acknowledge it, then go through the healing. But I have this real deep innate knowing that if people stop to look at theirs, they will serve in amazing ways. So you're absolutely spot on. But no trauma, in my view, outweighs another.
Say what you said again about the trauma in the body.
The body keeps score.
The body keeps score.
Yeah.
I love that.
The body keeps score, 100%. There's a book out there on it, it's titled the same, but the body does. And once again, that vocabulary allowed me to understand what my body is doing the minute I want to leave. So even sitting here with you, I found myself getting nervous and I found myself almost coming out of my body. But because I now have the vocabulary, the awareness, I was able to soothe my body and say, this is fine. This is a safe environment. it's Jack, it's Yemi, and just have the conversation. And that's why I want to elevate this conversation, because people will be able to stay in their body for what appears to be a perceived threat when it's just a ball of emotions.
So let's talk about that for a second. You said I was able to soothe my body.
Yeah.
And simply by talking to it, or how do you do that?
Yeah, so it's weird. So it's like, I mean, let's be honest, we all have another voice. For some, it's like saying you can do anything, and for others, it's no, you can't. So I just have this really gentle, loving voice that says, it's fine, just look at your surroundings, feel the emotion. But I have that dialogue in the back of my mind. And to be honest, for me as well, it helps me to say it. So when I go on stage and I do events, I actually tell people, if I am nervous, I'm nervous. I might have a bit of a potty mouth when I'm out here, but I don't mean any offense, but I'm nervous. And that really frees me.
You know, it's interesting. We just inherited 3 cats.
Oh, wow.
And literally this week. And so
Congratulations.
we're talking to them like that. It's okay. It's going to be all right. It's nothing scary here.
I think you're probably, what's the word? You know, when you're projecting, you're probably soothing yourself, and as a result, the cats as well.
Probably both are happening at the same time. That's true. That's very true. I love it. So you talk about generational trauma, and you touch on that in your documentary. Can you explain to our viewers what you mean by that, so they know what you're talking about?
So intergenerational trauma, I think, has so many different lenses, but the focus I have on is that if we do not resolve our own, I believe we pass it on in a different way. And I gave the example of my daughter. I mean, she hasn't gone through anything that I've gone through, and I had her permission to share some of the challenges she's having with self-identity, self-love. But because I had looked at mine in a deeper level, I wasn't able to be there for her and step in and guide her. So for me, intergenerational trauma happens by kind of just gliding past your own and then leaving the younger generation to just deal with it. And then there's another one, which for me is at a soul-based level, which is the things we take and we bring into the world. So if a story was told about women or men or being a different, orientation, you sometimes carry that trauma. And I'm saying, let's break it. Let's create a new story. Let's create a new narrative, and let's do it as a collective, because it will be faster and more powerful.
Beautiful, 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 beautiful. I had a shaman tell me recently that if you heal that relationship, whatever that is, it actually heals it 3 generations back.
Yes.
Wow. And one of the things I love about Africa and Africans, which you're from Nigeria, is whenever I've heard like the African shamans speak, they always say, I'm standing here, and standing behind me on my right is my father. Wow. Standing on my left behind me is my mother. And they'll go like 2 or 3 generations.
Oh my gosh, I'm getting goosebumps.
Yeah, that's true. And I thought that's really wild. Not only are you breaking the chain for the future, but you're healing some of the past karma from the people that were the ancestors and maybe even the perpetrators.
Right? Oh my God, I'm having an out-of-body experience, because you're saying all the words, and I'm sure there are people before us that have done it, and I'm sure you may have spoken it in different rooms. We need to bring it back in. We need to have the conversation. If we can do it from a compassionate place, I believe people will lean in. I mean, I just love that.
Yeah. One of the things I hate about these interviews is they have a time frame on them. I could talk to you all day. But if you had a main message for our viewers today, what would it be?
It would be that our greatest gift to humanity is to resolve our trauma. I truly believe if you can change your perspective and actually transmute, i.e. change the pain, every pain point in your life is part of the power, authentic power, that you give to the world. And do that with courage and compassion, and you will be contributing in ways you would have never thought. That would be my message.
Yeah. I remember someone once saying the greatest gift you can give your children is to work on yourself. So very similar, very similar. So, like I said, we could just dialogue back and forth about this forever.
We could.
But unfortunately, we're not going to be able to. So, but I want you to get this out. If someone wants to get a hold of you, if they're interested about your book, your documentary, other things you do, you mentioned speaking, etc., where do they go? How do they find you?
So, I mean, social media is doing its thing. So if you put my name in, Yemi Penn, YemiPenn, on any social media platform, you'll find me. And that's the same as my website, which is yemipenn.com. And all the information is there.
Very good. Very good. Well, keep up the good work.
Thank you.
This is so important. Our world needs this healing right now. And you are one of the healers that has stepped forward to do that. Thank you for your courage.
Thank you so much for your time.
Very welcome. Hey, and thank you for watching. You know where to go. If you're like most people, we've all got some trauma out there. So this is an opportunity to find out more about how to acknowledge yours, become aware of it, step into it, heal it, and then become part of what this world needs in terms of all of us coming together to live in peace, harmony, and joy. So thank you for joining us this week. We'll see you next week and talking about success. Thank you for watching this episode of Talking About Success. Remember, your success is a journey. So for more information and free resources to help you, be sure to visit jackcanfield.com/learn more.